HOA President Victoria Karen Ashford stormed onto my property, brandishing a stack of HOA regulations and demanding I tear down my Lake Ranch office on the spot, calling it an eyesore that looked like a public restroom. When I politely refused, she whipped out her phone and called 911, hysterically reporting a dangerous intruder. I'm Samuel Sam Fletcher, 42. 3 years ago I resigned from my role as a Millfield County judge after 15 years on the bench, fed up with bribery scandals and power plays. My final case involved a casino owner attempting to strong-arm poor families out of their land. I ruled in favor of the residents, but the political blowback left me disillusioned. Now I've retreated to my grandfather's ranch on Crystal Lake, offering free legal aid from a refurbished shipping container. That morning, I was perched on a stepladder, straightening the freshly painted sign reading "Free Legal Aid A. Sam Fletcher," when a polished white Mercedes SUV tore down my gravel driveway and kicked up dust as it stopped 20 feet away. A blonde woman in an impeccable navy suit climbed out, her bob haircut unmoved by the breeze, cheeks set in indignation. She moved with the certainty of someone accustomed to getting her way. She strode forward, heels clacking, and demanded to know what I thought I was doing. I introduced myself and explained that I owned the land and was merely sprucing up my office. She scoffed, insisting that Lakeshore Estates HOA rules forbade any structure that clashed with her community vision, and declared herself president of the neighborhood association. I offered to show her my deed. This parcel belonged to my family since 1963, long before any HOA existed, but she refused to listen. In frustration, I noticed she was secretly recording our exchange on a second phone hidden behind her clipboard. Her primary device was swiping through boundary surveys that clearly didn't include my property. I suggested we discuss it over coffee inside, hoping to defuse the situation. Instead, her face reddened as she barked that I had 24 hours to remove the container or face legal action, citing imaginary permit violations and obstruction of HOA authority. Then, with dramatic flair, she dialed 911 and reported me as a threat. Karen Ashford had just made her biggest mistake. She had no idea I was the very person empowered to issue an arrest warrant, and that in a matter of hours, she'd hear her own frantic 911 call played back to her from my desk. Dangerous intruder on my property. He's been threatening me. I'm afraid for my safety. He's a large man and very aggressive. Please send someone immediately. I stood still, watching the scene unfold with a mix of disbelief and growing concern. After years on the bench, I'd witnessed my share of manipulative theatrics and petty legal antics, but Karen's stunt was something else. The sheer boldness almost impressed me. "Mrs. Ashford," I said carefully, keeping my tone even, "I think there might be some misunderstanding regarding property boundaries. Before the police arrive, are you absolutely certain this land is part of your HOA's jurisdiction?" Her chin lifted defiantly. "Absolutely. And once the officers arrive, they'll understand exactly what kind of person disregards community standards. In just a few minutes, you'll find out what happens when someone disrespects the Lakeshore Estates Homeowners Association." What she didn't realize was that she had just made the worst decision of her life. 3 minutes later, a black Ford Explorer rolled up my driveway. The unmistakable gold lettering on the side read, "Millfield County Police Chief." Behind the wheel was none other than Bobby Martinez. Bobby and I had worked together countless times during my 15-year tenure as a judge. Now in his early 50s, he carried the steady presence of a man perfectly suited for the badge. I'd known him since his rookie days, and over the years we'd developed a quiet mutual respect born from long nights of emergency hearings and difficult cases. As he stepped out of the vehicle, recognition dawned across his face. His professional demeanor cracked into a warm grin, and he took off his sunglasses with a familiar shake of his head. "Judge Fletcher? Well, I'll be damned. What brings you all the way out here?" he said, his voice a mix of fondness and instinctive respect. Despite my 3-year retirement, he walked over and offered his hand. Karen stood beside her SUV, frozen in place, her mouth slightly open in disbelief, as Bobby and I shook hands like old friends. Her carefully constructed bravado began to collapse. "Judge?" she mumbled under her breath. Then louder, her voice tinged with panic, "The broken bar. You're a judge?" I could almost hear the mental gears grinding as she tried to process what she'd done. She had just called 911 on a man she now realized was a former county judge. Her performance of fear and victimhood began to feel embarrassingly hollow. "Retired Judge, Mrs. Ashford," I said gently, still calm. "I stepped down 3 years ago to enjoy a quieter life." I turned to Bobby. "Looks like we've got a small misunderstanding. Mrs. Ashford believes my property falls under her HOA. When I explained otherwise, she decided to contact the authorities." Bobby's expression shifted back to professional mode as he pulled out his notebook. Civil disputes were nothing new to him, and he quickly picked up on the pattern. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, his voice measured and neutral, "can you explain what happened this morning?" Karen tried, but the words tangled on her tongue. "Yeah, we were addressing a violation of broken bar community standards. A broken bar, and Mr. Judge Fletcher was a broken bar. He seemed in a broken bar." She trailed off, clearly realizing how absurd it sounded to accuse a retired judge of being a threat. Bobby studied her, flipping through notes with a knowing expression. "Ma'am," he asked carefully, "is this the same address that's been making repeated 911 calls?" Karen flushed a deep red. "I don't know what you mean by repeated. I only call in actual emergencies." Bobby continued flipping through his notebook. "According to dispatch records, 73 calls have come from numbers linked to this address and surrounding HOA properties in the last 18 months. That averages more than 1 call per week." The silence that followed was almost eerie. Even the birds seemed to pause. Karen opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally muttered, "Those were all legitimate calls. As HOA president, I have a responsibility to enforce our rules and keep things safe." Bobby read aloud from his notes. "Noise complaints about kids playing in their yards. Reports of suspicious activity involving mail carriers. Property maintenance complaints for having too many flowers. Unauthorized parking in private driveways." He looked at her with a raised brow. "Mrs. Ashford, 95% of these calls resulted in no action because no laws were being broken." I watched as her authority unraveled. It was becoming clear this wasn't the first time she'd abused her position or manipulated the system for personal control. "Chief Martinez," I said quietly, "is there an active investigation related to misuse of emergency services?" Bobby's face grew serious. "Yes, there is. We've been documenting a pattern of false reports and misuse of police resources. We were just waiting for the right time to move forward." Karen went pale. "False reports? Everything I've reported was valid. I'm protecting the community." But the conviction had left her voice, and everyone knew it. Bobby shut his notebook and looked her in the eyes. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to need you to come down to the station later today," Bobby said, his voice level but firm. "We'll need to go over some of your recent emergency calls and this morning's incident as well." Then he turned to me, his tone softening. "Judge Fletcher, I'm sorry you had to be dragged into this. If there's anything you need, just reach out." As he prepared to leave, Bobby leaned in, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Your Honor, one more thing. We've gotten several complaints about Mrs. Ashford from other residents. Some pretty serious stuff and allegations of harassment and intimidation. Just a broken bar. Be careful with her." That quiet warning lingered as he got into his cruiser and drove off, leaving me alone with a woman who was clearly unraveling. Karen stood beside her Mercedes, frantically working her phone. I couldn't make out her words, but her wild pacing and sharp gestures made her panic obvious. Whatever plans she had were falling apart fast, and learning that I was a former judge had clearly shattered whatever narrative she'd hoped to sell. As I watched her pace, a sinking feeling crept in that this wasn't over. Something told me her next move would be even more erratic. The following morning, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, mulling over everything that had happened. The tranquility was soon broken by the sound of tires on gravel. This time, it wasn't a luxury vehicle barreling in. An aging blue Honda Civic and an old but well-kept Buick sedan made their way up to the container office. When the cars stopped, 2 elderly women stepped out, determined, purposeful, and each carrying something that made it clear this wasn't a social visit. The first was Gladys Peterson, 77 years old, silver hair neatly tied in a bun, her posture and stride showing decades of no-nonsense experience. She radiated confidence, the kind you earn from a life of dealing with red tape and holding your ground. Beside her was Martha Williams, 65, with a nervous air and eyes that darted, like someone carrying a secret too big to keep. She held a bulging manila folder. Gladys, meanwhile, clutched a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "Judge Fletcher," Gladys called with the firm but warm tone of someone used to being listened to. "I hope you don't mind us dropping by, but after what happened yesterday, Martha and I decided it was time someone told you what's really been going on." She smiled and held out the dish. "Apple cobbler. Nothing important gets discussed without proper food." I couldn't help but chuckle. After decades in courtrooms, I'd learned that sometimes the best truths came out around a shared meal. "Please, come on in," I said, motioning toward the container office. "I'd like to hear what you know about Mrs. Ashford." Inside, we gathered around a small table. Gladys served generous slices of warm cobbler, hands down the best I'd had in years, while Martha spread her documents across the remaining space. The blend of homey sweetness and serious paperwork created a surreal contrast, comforting, yet ominous. "Judge Fletcher," Martha began, her voice shaky but determined, "I was HOA secretary for 8 years until Karen had me removed 6 months ago. What I'm about to show you could put me in a difficult position, a broken bar, but I can't stay silent anymore." She slid over a stack of meeting minutes and financial reports. "Karen's been rigging HOA votes, forging signatures, and taking in money from sources that aren't homeowner dues." The papers were covered in highlights and notes as a proof of months of careful documentation. Gladys leaned in, her expression hardening. "I worked in the county records office for 40 years before I retired. I know legit paperwork when I see it. Martha brought these to me a few months back, and what we uncovered, it's criminal." She pointed to a string of printed emails bearing official letterhead. "Karen's been taking a consultation fees from Lake Resort and Casino, 50 grand already, with promises of more if she delivers." My heart sank. The picture became clear instantly. A casino looking to expand would need lakeside access, and my land stood squarely in the way of their development plans. Martha's hands trembled as she pulled out another folder. "This is the worst part, Judge. 6 months ago, Karen presented the HOA board with a signed agreement supposedly from you stating you were donating your land for a community recreation center." She handed me the document. I stared at the signature. It was manila almost, close enough to pass at a glance, but not real. The date on it was 3 months before I'd ever even heard of Karen Ashford. "I refused to notarize it," Gladys added, her voice sharp with indignation. She had no ID and got aggressive when I started asking questions about the signature. That's when Martha and I began digging deeper. Martha nodded emphatically. "Karen fired me a week later, accused me of sabotaging the HOA and being a threat to its authority. But I made copies," she added, tapping the thick folder with resolve. "A broken bar, financial records, email threads, and minutes from home meetings where votes were recorded that never actually took place." Martha's voice trembled with a mix of anger and relief. "She's been running the HOA like it's her private kingdom." As I sorted through the evidence, a disturbing pattern began to take shape, methodical and far-reaching. This wasn't just one woman overstepping her authority. Karen hadn't simply bullied residents or made nuisance calls to law enforcement. She had orchestrated a full-scale manipulation of the HOA's structure, bending it to serve her own interests and those of powerful outside developers. The forged signature on the property agreement was only the tip of the iceberg. What we were looking at was a case of widespread fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, as something well beyond neighborhood politics. "Ladies," I said, lifting my eyes from the damning paperwork, "do you realize what you've uncovered here? This isn't just HOA overreach. This is federal fraud." Gladys gave a firm, knowing nod. "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say, Judge Fletcher. We're not attorneys, but we can tell when something stinks." Martha leaned forward, a spark of determination breaking through her nerves. "There's more. Karen keeps her real file, bank records, correspondence, the stuff she doesn't want anyone to see, in a locked safe at the HOA office. I still have my key. And she never changed the combination after firing me. She doesn't think anyone would dare challenge her." Her implication was clear. "What you're suggesting," I said cautiously, "could be considered breaking and entering." Still, my legal mind was already analyzing the situation. However, broken bar, if someone were to discover criminal activity while conducting legitimate HOA business, a broken bar. I let my sentence trail off. Martha immediately caught on. I was the secretary. Technically, I still have standing to investigate financial discrepancies. If I happen to come across illegal activity, a broken bar, then, I finished, you'd have a duty to report it to the authorities. As Gladys collected the empty cobbler dish and Martha carefully repacked her documents, it became clear that this was no longer a simple dispute about land or zoning. Karen hadn't randomly targeted me out of spite. She'd been executing a plan to push me off land that stood between a casino and millions in potential profit. But thanks to these two courageous women, I now had the ammunition I needed to fight back. The real question was, how far would Karen go to keep her scheme alive, and what would she do once she realized the walls were closing in? The next morning, I spread Martha's documents across my kitchen table like evidence in a courtroom. My coffee went cold as I traced the financial links between Karen, the HOA, and the lake resort and casino. What emerged was a carefully constructed web of shell companies and backdoor deals. There was enough money moving around to tempt tyranny and enough motive to make people dangerous. One name kept surfacing: Reginald Blackwood III, attorney at law. I had barely finished organizing the files when I heard the sound of expensive leather shoes crunching gravel. Looking out the window, I saw a sleek black Mercedes sedan roll confidently into my driveway. Everything about the vehicle screamed wealth and influence. The man who stepped out was equally deliberate in his presentation, tall, impeccably groomed, with silver hair slicked back and a tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire container office. He looked like he'd stepped out of a legal thriller. Predatory confidence, a leather briefcase, and a smirk that suggested he'd never been told number. When he knocked, it wasn't polite, it was commanding. "Mr. Fletcher," he called, "I'm Reginald Blackwood, legal counsel. I believe it would be in your best interest if we had a brief conversation." I opened the door with a neutral smile. "Mr. Blackwood, come in." "Coffee?" He blinked, clearly thrown by the civility. He stepped inside, taking in my modest office with visible distaste. "This won't take long," he said curtly. "I'm here to resolve a misunderstanding between you and my client, Mrs. Ashford." "Misunderstanding?" I raised an eyebrow, settling into my chair. "Filing a false police report doesn't strike me as a misunderstanding, but I'm listening." With practiced efficiency, he opened his briefcase and slid a document toward me. "My client acknowledges that emotions may have flared during your encounter. She's prepared to offer substantial compensation for your trouble." I glanced at the paper. $500,000, $500,000, a broken bar for a property dispute. I asked. "That's quite the overcompensation." Blackwood offered a thin, practiced smile. "Mrs. Ashford values community harmony. She believes this settlement reflects her commitment to resolving matters peaceably." I leaned back, studying him. "And what exactly would I need to do in return?" "Simply relocate your office to a more suitable location, one that aligns better with community aesthetics." I fixed my gaze on him. "Mr. Blackwood, are you licensed to practice law in Millfield County?" His mask slipped for a split second. "I'm licensed in this state. My credentials aren't in question." I opened my laptop. "Interesting. According to the State Bar Association, you've been disciplined twice in the past 5 years for using intimidation tactics and making threats during negotiations." His jaw clenched. "Minor procedural issues, all resolved. And your primary office is based in the capital, over 200 miles away. That's quite the distance for a minor zoning disagreement, a broken bar, unless this isn't really about HOA rules at all." His polished exterior began to crack. Existing resort infrastructure and the only deep water access point that could accommodate large casino boats. "They've already acquired every other parcel around the lake," she said, tapping her finger on the last remaining load of mine. "You're the only holdout, and from what we've seen, they're pulling every trick in the book to push you out." I exhaled slowly, the weight of it all settling in. "So this whole thing of the HOA nonsense, the false police reports, the settlement offer, was all just pressure tactics to get me to give up the land?" Agent Chen nodded. "Exactly. And they've done this before. Not just here, other small towns where the paper trail was easier to bury and people were less likely to fight back. But they didn't count on someone with your background, your connections, or your spine." I studied the photos again. Karina, or rather, Victoria Kowalski, appeared in them as calm, smiling, in control. The facade she'd maintained for years had been well crafted, but now it was beginning to crack. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Legally, nothing right now," she said, closing the folder. "But if you're willing, your cooperation could help us tie the final threads together. Testimony, access to what you've uncovered, context from your interactions, anything that strengthens the case." I nodded. "You've got it. I won't let them bulldoze their way through this town. Not while I'm still standing on that land." Agent Chen smiled, a mix of respect and resolve in her expression. "Then I'd say they've officially picked the wrong person to mess with." As she left, the weight in my chest had shifted. What began as a personal nuisance had grown into a full-blown criminal conspiracy. But now, I had allies, real ones. And with the FBI involved, Carranza, or rather, Victoria's web of lies was about to unravel for good. A broken bar, the offshore accounts, and the bribes funneled through bogus renovation grants. "You think I haven't seen this kind of scheme before? I spent 15 years putting people just like you behind bars." Victoria frowns, the lighter still hovering midair, her hand trembling. The rage on her face was now laced with something else, a doubt. Her voice cracked. "You think you can stop them? The casino, the developers, a broken bar, they're bigger than all of us. I was just surviving by burning down people's homes, stealing land, framing innocent families. That's not survival, Victoria, that's exploitation." Her shoulders slumped slightly, and I saw the gas can tip just enough to slosh its contents across the floor. One spark, and everything inside this office would be gone, along with any chance of justice. "I didn't come here to destroy you," I said carefully. "I came here to stop the people using you." "You've still got a choice to make. Help yourself before it's too late." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She stood motionless for a moment, chest rising and falling rapidly, then just as suddenly as she threw the lighter to the ground. It didn't ignite. She hadn't struck it. The tension drained from the air all at once, and I lunged forward, kicking the lighter away and grabbing the gas can from her hands. She collapsed into the office chair behind her, burying her face in her hands, shaking. The recording pen in my pocket had captured every word of her confession. I stepped back, letting her fall apart in silence as I dialed Agent Chen. "She tried to torch the place," I said, my voice even. "But she confessed. It's all on tape." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Understood," Chen replied. "We're on our way." "Don't let her out of your sight." I stood at the threshold of the ruined office, the acrid scent of gasoline still heavy in the air, and looked at the broken figure of Victoria Kowalski. "It was over," ChatGPT said. I stared her down. "I know about Reginald Blackwood and his history of threats and intimidation. I know about the so-called day consulting fees at $200,000 from Lake Resort funneled straight into your pockets." Victoria's face turned ghostly pale, her composure shattered as I laid out the mountain of evidence against her. "But most damning of all," I continued, "I know you called 911 and filed a false police report, claiming I was a dangerous intruder who threatened your life." "You are a threat," she shrieked, waving the gas can so violently that it sloshed perilously close to the lit flame in her hand. "You're threatening everything I've worked for. The casino expansion is going to bring jobs, money, progress. I'm helping this community grow, and you're standing in the way because you're too attached to a useless patch of dirt." The irony was staggering. Here she was, standing in my office, armed with gasoline and threatening to commit arson, while accusing me of being the danger. "Victoria," I said calmly, "you're not helping anyone but yourself. You've been taking bribes from the casino to manipulate land sales and drive families off land they've had for generations." I pointed to the soaked documents on the floor. "Those papers hold evidence of fraud, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy. Burning them won't stop the federal investigation." At the mention of federal charges, her entire body flinched. She staggered back and gripped the edge of my desk to keep from falling. "Federal investigation, a broken bar," she echoed, the words barely audible. "That's right," I said, watching as her world unraveled before her eyes. "The FBI has been building a case against Lake Resort and Casino. They've been tracking money trails, shell companies, election interference, and your name shows up repeatedly in the financial records." Gasoline spilled over her shoes as her grip on the can slipped. I reached into my pocket and slowly pulled out my phone. "Agent Sarah Chen is very eager to speak with you." I told her. That was it. The dam broke. Victoria collapsed into the chair across from me, sobbing. The lighter fell from her trembling hands, clattering harmlessly to the floor. The gas can tipped and poured its contents across the floor. "This can't be happening," she whispered. I was careful. I used different name as a broken bar, different accounts a broken bar. How did they find me? Her transformation was complete. The self-righteous HOA queen had crumbled into a sobbing criminal, unraveling before my eyes. "Victoria Kowalski," I said, standing tall and reaching into my desk drawer, also known as Victoria Karen Ashford. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing a false police report, attempted arson, and multiple violations under federal racketeering law." I took out a signed arrest warrant prepared in advance, just in case, and held it up. "As a duly authorized Deputy Judicial Officer of Millfield County, I am executing this warrant based on evidence gathered and crimes committed in my presence." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't arrest me, you're retired." I gave her a calm, steady look and held the warrant closer. "Retired judges in this county retain limited emergency powers, including the right to issue and enforce arrest warrants in active crimes witnessed on site. It's in the county charter. Perfectly legal." I reached into my emergency kit and secured her wrists with zip-tie restraints. Then I activated the playback feature on my recording pen. A moment later, her voice filled the room. "Yes, hello. I need police assistance immediately. There's a dangerous intruder on my property. He's threatening me. I'm afraid for my safety." I paused the recording and looked her in the eye. "Ironic, isn't it? You tried to paint me as the threat, but here you are, the one with gasoline and elytra caught red-handed in the act." 6 months later, I sat in the front row of federal court as Judge Margaret Harrison read the verdict in United States v. Lake Resort and Casino. The courtroom was packed to press, locals, law enforcement, all watching justice finally catch up. Victoria Kowalski stood next to her court-appointed lawyer, no longer the perfectly poised HOA president. Her orange jumpsuit said it all. "Mrs. Kowalski," the judge read aloud, "you've been found guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, filing false police reports, and racketeering. You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release." The casino's leadership didn't fare much better. CEO Richard Branson received 15 years for orchestrating the operation, while his associates earned sentences ranging from 8 to 12 years. The court also levied a $50 million fine against Lake Resort and Casino, revoked all of its gaming licenses, and ordered the forfeiture of every property it had fraudulently obtained. Those lands would be sold off, and the proceeds returned to the families they had tried to steal from. It was justice, complete, undeniable, and deeply satisfying. Victoria's arrest had set everything in motion. Hours after I'd called Agent Chen, the FBI raided the HOA office and uncovered damning evidence via financial records, forged deeds, emails connecting Victoria directly to the casino executives. And the most powerful piece of evidence? The recording I'd made the moment Victoria tried to burn my office to the ground. That one moment had brought down an empire. The cooperation of Victoria's co-conspirators with federal agents was largely sparked by the audio recording of her emotional collapse in my office. Its impact was undeniable. The fallout within our community was swift and transformative. With Victoria's corrupt reign over the HOA exposed, residents of Lakeshore Estates held a new election. Martha Williams was chosen as president. One of her first reforms was to implement open book financial reporting and mandate that all HOA meetings be recorded and made available to the public. No more secrecy or shady deals, she declared at her first official gathering. This neighborhood belongs to its residents and not to developers or wannabe dictators. Her words were met with overwhelming applause and genuine enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Gladys Peterson became somewhat of a local legend. Her involvement in unmasking the corruption made headlines, and the county newspaper featured her on the front page as the 77-year-old grandmother who helped topple a criminal network. She was soon speaking at community events across the region, championing civic responsibility. "Age is just a number," she told one crowd, flashing her signature charm. "What counts is experience and a will to do what's right. As for me, The revelation of my background as a judge and my involvement in the investigation changed what I thought would be a quiet retirement. Word of the retired judge who exposed a corrupt HOA president began to circulate far and wide. My phone rang constantly. Calls came in from across the state, all from people facing similar struggles: property disputes, HOA abuse, unethical landlords, and civil rights violations. Eventually, I decided it was time to turn my humble container office into something more permanent. 3 months after Victoria's sentencing, Fletcher Community Defense officially opened. We converted the old office into a real legal clinic, complete with meeting rooms, a research area, and offices for 2 part-time attorneys. Our mission was straightforward: offer free legal help to those being harassed by corrupt HOAs, predatory developers, and power-hungry local authorities. Word spread quickly through community networks and social media. Soon, we were taking on cases from across the tri-state area. Each case was personal and meaningful. We helped a war veteran whose HOA tried to ban his flagpole, defended a single mother against a greedy landlord's illegal rent hikes, and saved a decades-old community garden from being bulldozed by a corporate developer. Every win felt like a blow against the kind of injustice Victoria and her casino allies once thrived on. Almost exactly a year after Victoria first showed up at my property, I was reviewing a new case file when my secretary entered. "Judge Fletcher, there's a call for you on line 2. It's the State Bar Association." I answered the phone, curious about why the legal board was calling a retired judge now running a small legal clinic. The voice on the other end was familiar: Director Patricia Holmes. We had crossed paths many times over the years. "Sam," she began, "we've been tracking a troubling rise in HOA-related abuse and corruption statewide. Many of the complaints are similar to the ones you faced. We're thinking of creating a special prosecutor role to deal exclusively with these kinds of civil rights issues. Would you be open to a conversation about it?" I was intrigued. It was a chance to expand what I'd been doing locally and help even more people across the state. 2 weeks later, I was in the state capitol, signing the documents that made me the first special prosecutor dedicated to HOA misconduct and community rights violations. The role came with real power and the resources to back it up. My very first case centered around a retirement community where the HOA had been embezzling funds and intimidating elderly residents into silence. As I reviewed the evidence, I couldn't help but smirk at the full-circle irony. Victoria had believed she could steamroll a quiet, retired judge. Instead, she had sparked something that would spend years making life difficult for others like her. That evening, I phoned Agent Chen to share the news. "Congratulations, Judge Fletcher," she said warmly. "You know, we're seeing similar land-grab casino operations in at least half a dozen other states. Someone with your experience and integrity could make a big difference." I ended the call and gazed out over Crystal Lake, where the sunset bathed the water in gold and orange. Retirement had turned out to be anything but peaceful. Justice, I'd realized, doesn't retire, it simply evolves. There are times when we feel helpless in the face of bullies with authority, HOA presidents, unscrupulous landlords, or manipulative bureaucrats. But Sam's story is proof that courage, knowledge, and community unity can overcome even the most calculated corruption. You don't have to be a judge to fight for what's right. At HOA Stories, we believe justice and dignity are for everyone. If this story inspired you to keep standing up for what matters, please consider liking and subscribing. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thank you for spending some of your valuable time with us. If this episode made you feel a little better about that $50 mailbox complaint, then we've done our job. Subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales where justice gets its moment in the spotlight, often in the most unexpected ways.